In January 1930, in the icy mountains of northern Colorado, the houses in the small village were always built the same way: thin wooden walls, low roofs, doors facing the valley. It had been like that for generations. It worked, until it stopped working. While the men were reinforcing roofs and stockpiling firewood as they did every year, one of them was doing the exact opposite. Instead of building new walls, he would disappear into a limestone hillside, carrying wood, tools, and silence. "He's going to die buried alive," someone said. "A cave is not a home," others laughed. That afternoon, the sky darkened far too early. The wind changed direction. The temperature dropped far too quickly to be normal. When the first snowflakes began to fall sideways, it was no longer an ordinary winter. 5 days later, the village would be frozen, and only one door could still be opened. But at that moment, nobody knew which one. The village was called Red Hollow Ridge. A few dozen houses scattered among steep slopes, stone paths, and fields that only produced something when the weather allowed. The cold had always been there, but it was predictable, harsh, but familiar. The caveman's name was Ethan Walker. He spoke little. He worked alone. Months earlier, he had bought a piece of land considered useless, too rocky to plant, too steep to build on. The only value of the land was a dark opening in the mountain, an ancient cave, ignored by everyone. Ethan didn't try to convince anyone. He just started. While the village awoke to the sound of hammers and voices, he climbed the trail before dawn, carrying logs on his back. He would descend at dusk, covered in white dust, without explaining anything. The comments started coming in early. "He thinks he's an animal. He will live buried like the dead. When the heavy snow comes, the mountain will swallow him." Ethan listened. He continued. Inside the cave, he patiently cleaned the floor. He tested the sturdiness of the walls with short taps. He observed the ceiling. He marked points with charcoal. Each decision was slow, calculated, silent. He built the cabin inside the rock, not at the entrance. He left an empty space between the door and the outside world. He didn't explain why. He just did it. When someone asked why he didn't build a real house, he replied in a few words, "The wind doesn't get in here." That was enough to become a laughingstock. The children began to call the place the Burrow, the adults from Ethan's madness. Winter was approaching and the village was preparing as always. Firewood piled against flimsy walls, worn blankets, doors reinforced with bent nails. Everything the same as other years. Ethan, no. He reinforced the cave entrance from the inside. He piled food into natural rock niches. He watched the water slowly trickling down a deeper crack, constant, even on the driest days. When the first light snows arrived, the villagers exclaimed, "I want to see what happens when the cold weather really sets in." Ethan did not respond. That same week, something changed. The wind began to blow from the top of the mountain, not from the valley. The birds disappeared. At night, the cold seemed heavier, denser. It wasn't just temperature. It was pressure. It was waiting. Ethan started sleeping with his boots on. In the village, nobody noticed the detail, but the mountain noticed. And I was already going down. The decision to live in the cave did not stem from courage. It was born from observation. Ethan Walker had grown up in those mountains. Since he was a boy, he had learned to respect the silence of the mountains. He knew when the wind changed before the snow. He knew when the cold came shallowly, and when it came deep, the kind that gets into your bones and doesn't leave. Years before, he had seen a winter kill slowly. It wasn't a major tragedy on record. Just 3 elderly people who couldn't withstand a week of constant cold. Entire houses frozen inside. Solid water in the pots. Fires that couldn't keep up. That winter, Ethan had noticed something simple. The houses most affected were those most exposed. When he found the cave months later, he didn't think about immediate shelter. He thought about stability. The temperature inside didn't change much, neither during the day nor at night. Not in the driest summer, nor in the harshest winter. While others saw darkness, he saw constancy. The choice was not announced, it was simply executed. Ethan started with what no one could see, the ground. He removed loose stones, leveled it with brute force, using improvised levers. Every meter gained was achieved with patience. Sometimes he spent hours moving a single rock. Those watching from afar found it entertaining. He's going to get tired. No one can stand living in isolation like this. But loneliness was nothing new for Ethan. Instability, yes. He built the cabin like someone building something that can't fail. Simple, Thick walls, fitted together with precision. A roof low enough to retain heat, high enough to breathe. He left a minimal opening for light. He installed a heavy door, made of reclaimed wood, fitted to close snugly. When someone commented that it looked more like a tomb than a house, he didn't argue. The villagers didn't understand the main detail. Ethan wasn't running away from people. He was preparing for something they refused to imagine. The first snowfalls were light. The flakes were almost decorative. The village calmed down. It's always like this. Winter is only scary at first. Ethan, no. He realized that the snow wasn't melting as it should, that the ground remained hard for longer, that the wind wasn't bringing moisture. It was bringing cuts. On a quiet afternoon with the sun disappearing too early behind the mountains, Ethan finished the last adjustment to the inner door. He closed it. He opened it. He closed it again. The sound inside was different, more stuffy, more calm. In the village, someone commented that he was wasting the last good day before the real cold. Ethan spent the night awake, sitting, listening to the mountain breathe. The next morning, the sky dawned gray and heavy. The wind shifted again, now blowing directly from the top, too fast. The chickens didn't come out, the dogs didn't bark. Ethan placed more firewood near the stove. He checked the food. He closed the cave door from the outside, and he went in. It was too early to hide, but it was too late to pretend that nothing was happening. And what came next? I wouldn't warn you twice. The snow began to fall before sunset, fine and steady. Outside, Red Hollow still seemed untouched. The houses breathed. Chimneys released smoke. Ethan watched from the cave entrance. He knew that kind of snow was deceptive. It didn't hurt immediately. It merely prepared the ground. When it grew dark, the cold arrived too quickly. Not in waves, but in steps. Inside the cave, the air remained stable. Not hot, just constant. He lit the stove briefly. He didn't want to use up firewood too soon. Resisting wasn't about consuming. It was about moderation. In the village, doors were locked early. Children slept with extra clothes on. Someone commented that the winter was strange. In the middle of the night, the wind arrived. Not like a burst, but like a presence. A deep sound that didn't hit the walls. It pressed down. Ethan woke up before the worst happened. He put on his coat. He leaned his hand against the door. Free, but not ice cold. Outside, the world no longer behaved as before. The snow came in sideways, cutting off the entrance to the cave. Visibility had disappeared. He opened it just enough to look, and it closed. In the village, someone tried to go out to reinforce the roof. They didn't return. The wind pushed their body against the house until they couldn't breathe. The following hours were filled with small decisions. Move food, adjust firewood, reinforce the seal with thick cloth. Nothing dramatic, just corrections. The mistake happened on the second day. The stove began to draw less air. The flame flickered. Ethan realized too late that the wind had altered the smoke's exit. He put out the fire. He sat down. He waited. He thought. No panic, but with doubt. If the exit were blocked, if the smoke came back, the cave would cease to be a shelter. He put on his thickest coat. He tied a cloth around his face. He adjusted the makeshift chimney with his bare hands, feeling the pain rise quickly. When he returned, his fingers barely responded. The flame returned to a stable position. Small victory. No celebration. On the third day, the snow had swallowed the village gates. The firewood outside was inaccessible. The water had frozen inside the jars. Ethan heard distant screams once. He didn't answer. Leaving meant not returning. Inside the cave, time stretched out. The cold didn't advance. Hunger was kept under control. But winter hadn't revealed everything yet. By the end of the fourth day, the wind hadn't increased in strength. It had increased in duration. A continuous sound without pauses. Ethan sat down, his back against the stone, his eyes closed. I knew that was only the first test. The fifth day began without dawn. No light got in. The snow had sealed almost everything off. The water that trickled down the crack was weaker. Nothing fatal. And that was the danger. He wasted too much fuel. He ate less than he should have. He drank too little. The mistake wasn't that big. It accumulated. Late in the afternoon, he heard something unexpected. Beats. Humanities. A faint voice called his name. It was Margaret, the widow from the tallest house in the village. She was carrying her grandson in her arms. The child wasn't crying. He was trembling. Ethan remained motionless for what felt like an eternity. Opening the door meant real risk. He didn't say anything. He simply acted. He pulled them both into the transition space. He closed in with his body, using his own weight. Margaret fell to her knees. The boy was too cold. Ethan didn't ask anything. He covered the child. He rekindled the fire. The smoke hesitated. The most dangerous moment. He adjusted the output once more, almost without any sensitivity. The child coughed. Viva. Hours passed. Ethan didn't sleep. He controlled the fire, his breathing, the space. If someone else came along, there would be no room for error. In the village, other doors did not open in time. That night, Ethan understood something definitive. Surviving alone is one thing. Surviving by being a shelter, that's another story. When the wind finally died down for a few hours, he stayed awake, watching the child breathe, feeling in his own body the weight of every decision he had made before, and knowing that the mountain had not yet finished collecting its due. Winter was not yet over, and now he was no longer alone in making mistakes. The presence of Margaret and the boy changed the weight of the silence. Before, the cave responded only to Ethan. Now every sound had a consequence. Every adjustment needed to work for three bodies, not one. The air seemed shorter, the space narrower. Ethan realized this the very first night after rescuing them. The fire provided warmth, but demanded constant vigilance. The boy, Caleb, was breathing irregularly. He wasn't in immediate danger, but the cold had set in deeply. Margaret remained awake, sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, as if the movement could keep the heat circulating. Nobody was talking. Outside, the blizzard showed no sign of letting up. The wind had died down for a few hours, only to return with more intensity, no longer violent, persistent, like something that didn't need to prove its strength, only to wait. Ethan organized the routine without announcing it. He divided the water into small portions. The fire intensified at calculated intervals. He repositioned blankets to create makeshift thermal barriers. Every action had a cost, and every mistake would now be shared. On the second day with them there, something gave way. It wasn't the door. It wasn't the ceiling. It was Ethan's body. He woke up too late, with the fire almost out. The temperature had dropped more than it should have. He felt dizzy when he stood up. His legs were slow to respond. Margaret noticed first. She didn't speak. She simply stood up and put more wood on the stove, just as she had seen him do before. The gesture was clumsy, but sufficient. Ethan sat down. He took a deep breath. He drank some water. He ate more than he intended. He silently accepted that he was no longer invulnerable. In the village, the situation was becoming irreversible. Houses buried up to their roofs, blocked chimneys, entire families trapped in a single room, burning furniture to keep warm. The cold had ceased to be a climatic event. It had become a filter. Inside the cave, the third day brought the greatest test. The wind has changed again. Now it was coming straight at the entrance. Not in gusts, but with continuous pressure. The snow began to accumulate in the outer corridor, pushed in inch by inch. Ethan realized it too late. When he tried to open the outside door to check, it barely budged. The compacted snow on the other side was pushing against it. If it gave way completely, it might not close again. He stopped. He thought. He retreated. He decided not to open. The decision required information, but it preserved the internal balance. Still, the air began to change. More humid, heavier. The cave's natural ventilation was being affected. The fire flickered. Caleb started coughing again. Margaret pressed the boy against her chest, her eyes fixed on Ethan, not as a reprimand, as a silent question. Ethan stood up slowly. He picked up his tools. He put on his thickest coat. He approached the inner exit that led to the secondary ventilation point, a deeper vent that he had kept clear from the start. Nobody had ever known about it. No one had ever asked. He adjusted the stones. He removed ice. He redirected the minimal airflow. He worked in partial darkness, feeling more than seeing. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, the air started circulating again. Not better, just enough. Ethan sat on the ground, exhausted. His body trembled now, not only from the cold but from sheer desperation. The fire remained lit. The boy was breathing better. That was the most he could do. That night, something unexpected happened. Other beats. This time, more than one voice. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He didn't open the door. He didn't move. He just listened. And he understood. The village had collapsed. People didn't come out of curiosity. They came because they no longer had functioning doors. They no longer had walls that could keep out the wind. He looked at Margaret, at Caleb, at the confined space, at the remaining firewood. The decision he made there was not heroic. It was mathematics. He opened it just enough to speak. Not all of you. DC. The voice came out low but firm. Whoever doesn't come in now, won't come in later. Silence outside. Then, the chosen steps. The biggest challenge was no longer the cold. That was the limit, and he had just crossed it. Those who entered said nothing. There were no lengthy requests. There were no explanations. Only weary bodies slipped through the narrow opening, one at a time, chosen not by status, but by condition. A woman with hands purple from the cold, a man carrying his nearly unconscious father, 2 children who no longer cried. Ethan closed the door behind them. The sound of the wind faded into the distance again. Inside the cave, the meaning of space changed. It was no longer a makeshift shelter. It had become an absolute boundary. Every inch mattered. Every breath counted. The same men who had laughed months before now avoided looking him in the eye, not out of open shame, but because the silence was heavier than any apology. Ethan didn't comment. She gestured to indicate where to sit, where to lie down, where not to move around too much. She rearranged blankets, redistributed water, adjusted the heat to a level that wouldn't consume everything too quickly. Nobody complained. Outside, the snowstorm continued, but it no longer roared. It simply existed, like something fulfilling its purpose without haste. The youngest child began to cry weakly, not from fear, from hunger. Ethan broke a stale piece of bread into smaller pieces than he would have liked. He gave some to the children first, then to the elderly, and ate it last. No one commented. The man who months before had said, laughing, that caves were for animals, was now helping to keep the air vent clear, following simple instructions without arguing. The reversal was not announced. It was felt. In that space, titles didn't exist. The village didn't exist. Only survival, organized by the only one who had thought of it before. When the 4th day ended, the wind finally died down. It didn't stop. It just lost momentum. The snow continued, but now it fell downwards, not sideways. Ethan noticed it first. He opened a small crack in the outside door. The cold came in, but not violently, just cold, normal, bearable. It closed again. He waited a few more hours. The following morning, the first visible sunrise in almost a week, the light touched the cave entrance again. A different kind of white, less harsh. When he finally opened the door completely, what was revealed was not immediate liberation. It was devastating. The village was unrecognizable, roofs buried, houses collapsed, paths erased. The silence now came from absence, not from containment. Some left the cave in silence. Others lingered. No one celebrated. The man who had previously been the most critical approached Ethan. He stopped a few steps away. He looked at the cave entrance, then at the ground. You were right, DC. Nothing more. Ethan nodded only once. He didn't explain. He did not accept a formal apology. He did not respond with pride. He started to help. He helped unearth doors, locating survivors, dividing what little remained, using the cave as a base for those who couldn't return home. Without speeches, his role had changed. He wasn't a leader. It was a benchmark. In the following days, the village understood something without needing to verbalize it. They had not survived despite Ethan's strange choice. They had survived because of her, and nobody laughed anymore. The snowstorm ended on the 6th day. There was no announcement. There was no immediate sun. It was simply the slow realization that the wind was no longer pushing the world against itself. Red Hollow Ridge has not returned to normal, because normal no longer existed. Some houses were never reopened. Others had to be dismantled before anyone could enter. There were marks on the ground indicating where doors had been buried for days. Inside certain walls, the ice remained even as the air began to warm up. 7 people did not survive. There was no grand ceremony, just silence and work. Ethan's cave wasn't closed after the emergency. On the contrary, it became a permanent stop. Those who had nowhere to stay spent the night there. Those who needed to keep children or the elderly warm during the coldest nights climbed the trail in silence. Ethan didn't charge anything. He imposed no rules beyond what was necessary. He did not explain his choice. The village began to see things differently. Some men began reinforcing their homes against the slopes, seeking natural shelter. Others inquired carefully about the interior of the cave, about the temperature, about the wind, about the mistake that had almost cost them everything. Ethan didn't answer much. He showed more. It indicated where the cold didn't arrive first, where the wind always found a way through, where the stone remained constant. The cave is no longer an exception. It became a benchmark. Over time, small adaptations emerged. Semi-buried warehouses, rooms protected by rock, thicker walls facing north. The village didn't become a collection of caves, but it learned to hide better. Ethan continued living where he had always lived. The cabin inside the rock remained simple. The fire was controlled. The door was heavy. Nothing was expanded beyond what was necessary. The space was never intended for excessive comfort, only for lingering. Margaret and her grandson did not return to the old house. They stayed near the cave throughout the following winter. Not out of fear, out of logic. When someone from the outside asked if Ethan was now respected, no one answered directly. Respect was not a topic of conversation there. This was demonstrated by the absence of laughter. Years later, another snowstorm hit the mountain range. Smaller, more predictable. Still, that night, lights moved along the trail toward the slope. The door was opened before they knocked. Ethan grew old there. He died as he lived, without fanfare. Inside the mountain he had chosen. The cabin was not dismantled. The cave was not sealed. It remained as it was. Today, anyone passing by Red Hollow Ridge can still see the dark opening in the rock. There is no sign, no name engraved, just a path beaten by the repeated passage of people who learned something without needing to write. Sometimes, surviving doesn't require building something new. It requires acknowledging what was already there. That cave was never a symbol of isolation. It was a reminder. While many tried to withstand the winter by building higher walls, one man simply took a step back, into the mountain, and let the stone do the work that pride could not. Red Hollow Ridge doesn't remember Ethan Walker as a hero. Remember him as someone who didn't need to prove anything. Because when the cold came without warning, when the snow erased paths and certainties, the strangest place was the only one that remained. And sometimes, that's how the truth comes out. It's not about who shouts the loudest, but in whom he prepared himself in silence. If this story has stayed with you in silence, perhaps this channel is also the place for you. Sign up.